Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we got a mega mailbag for you. So you got the questions. Hopefully, Joe and I have plenty of answers on the coaching staff, the lineup, and everybody's wondering how David Stearns is going to fix this pitching staff and even the bullpen a little bit throughout this offseason. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SMY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance range style, 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac, the all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade IQ, Vistic Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, we promised it. The Mega-Mailbag is here. The Mets Pod mailman are hopefully here to deliver. This is the show for the people. And it kind of feels a little Bruce Almighty-ish right now, Joe, where like the inbox has just been overflowing for months because people have been talking about the offseason going all the way back to June. And admittedly, you and I are like, oh, well, there'll be a time for that. Let's enjoy Mets baseball. Unfortunately, the first week of October is the time for that. So here we go.
The time is now, and glad that everyone is so invested in the offseason as you and I both are. I don't think we want to make it a regular thing to be invested in the offseason in June, but we're here for you now, and let's start to rebuild this thing.
Yeah, well, here we go. There's no time to waste. So let's start with the coaching staff changes, which is the most prominent immediate news, and this is from Christopher Oreo, Christo on Twitter. Thank you. What do you think about JD Martinez as hitting coach and Carlos Beltran as bench coach? JD seemed to have a positive effect on young players like Vientos in 2024, and Beltran is one of the smartest baseball minds around and very close to Lindor. I guess this is an easy transition for us, Joe, that the Mets essentially cleaned out their coaching staff. Obviously, Carlos Mendoza will be back. Antoine Richardson is expected to be back as things stand right now. The Mets stand out first base coach. But other than that, it's really a house cleaning for this organization that has plenty of hires to make.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, Connor, that the hitting coaches were changed out in Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes. Mike Sarbaugh as the third base coach, not particularly surprising either.
He had a tough year.
He did have a tough year. It seemed like there was just one send that didn't go his way, and then he got kind of passive the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Glenn Sherlock retired, catching instructor. John Gibbons is stepping away. I don't know if he's done in baseball. He did have a podcast, so maybe he could join a podcast, make his podcast back.
One of the great characters of the game.
He is, for sure. And he was an important piece, I think, to Mendoza's staff. Yeah. But the biggest one ultimately here is Jeremy Hefner being out as the Mets pitching coach. And we talked about it on last week's show that it wouldn't shock us if Hefner was gone, but I really thought he should have stayed. I think Hefner is an excellent pitching coach. The body of work supports that. If you remember, at the end of May, the Mets were making magic out of Griffin Canning. They had the best ERA in all of baseball. Then it obviously went south, and the season went south, and Hefner's been through enough regimes that I think it was just time for, I guess, a new voice. But I don't want people to just remember the second half of 2025 with Jeremy Hefner, because there's been so much good that he's brought to this organization, not just on the big league staff, but Eric Jagers and the staff that's down in the minor leagues. Jeremy Hefner was a huge part in getting those guys brought in to build up this player development system to be what it is. So I think Hefner will be missed, but there's other pitching coaches, other hitting coaches, and the Mets are now on the prowl to fill out a staff under Mendoza in a year that it's going to have to take a big step forward. And talking specifically to the question here from Christopher, I just want to say this, and I don't blame anybody for doing it, because the reality is whoever the Mets hire at most of these positions, you're not going to have heard of them, probably. I probably won't even know a good percentage of them, so we'll kind of learn together. We need to stop with maybe not stop, but cool it a little bit with the just recommending former good Major League Baseball players and just say that should be the hitting coach, that should be the pitching coach. JD Martinez was a great veteran for the 2024 Mets, and I think he was helpful in the locker room. I don't think that makes him necessarily qualified to be a full-time hitting coach. And also, I think he wants to pursue this pickleball career. So I don't think JD's planning on going on the road full-time with a major league team anyway. But Connor, I want to pass this one to you because I've kind of blabbered here for a couple minutes. What would your thoughts be if the Mets decided to give Carlos Beltran an opportunity to be the bench coach under Carlos Mendoza?
Honestly, I would like it. I think Beltran has been one of those guys that, number one, he played in a lot of different places throughout his career, and it always felt like he drew a lot of respect wherever he went. I think that really says something about the player. And I don't think, and I know you read David Wright's book, Joe, by Anthony DiComo. There was a really good chapter in there specifically on when Beltran came to the team and the kind of effect that Beltran had on Wright in the offseason, not like just in the dugout and everything leading up to that. So it's just Beltran is that kind of figure in the sport that I think young players are very comfortable with him. And to be fair, it's one of those situations where we don't know how Beltran would have been as a manager if that continued onwards. But being a bench coach gives you a lot of experience. It's the pathway a lot of guys take to getting that experience before they take that next step. So maybe if Beltran wants that, it's the next step for him. Here's the problem, though, with it, Joe. The problem with it is, and the Mets might not care about this, but just to raise one issue to it, the first losing streak the Mets have, it is low-hanging fruit for the portion of the fan base to be yelling to fire Carlos Mendoza because Carlos Beltran is in the dugout. Whether that's fair or not, when you put that, like how many times, Joe, did you hear people say this year, fire Carlos Mendoza and just promote John Gibbons? Almost never, right? But when Carlos Beltran is in the dugout, and that might not matter, right? Because some organizations can just tune out the outside noise, but there might be people in the organization that go, I wouldn't love Mendoza to have to deal with that all year every time we deal with adversity, because there is already a portion of this fan base that didn't want Mendoza back this year, whether that's fair or not. So I don't know how much that matters, Joe, but that is my only glass half empty look at it.
That is something they're going to have to balance in filling this job. You want to make sure Carlos Mendoza feels secure in his job. You don't want it to be too secure that nothing could go wrong, but you don't want it to get to the point, like you said, that there's someone next to him that is just so much clearly the guy if there's a bad losing streak or a bad stretch. So it'll be interesting to see how they pursue that job specifically. But I think Carlos Beltran, of course, has a great relationship with the Mets organization. He works as a special assistant. So that's one I don't think I'd rule out, but largely I would keep the mind off of former players and realize that it's going to be just coaches from other teams.
Our next question from Caroline Rose, love from Caroline on Twitter. Free agency, who fits best with the Mets and why? Joe, do you have just give me maybe one pitcher, one hitter, if you have someone you're already kind of banging the table for that you think could be a player you like, or could be a player that you think just logistically makes sense for the Mets?
I have two absolute perfect fits for the Mets.
Okay.
The Mets need a power hitting first baseman, and there's a guy named Pete Alonso that is a free agent.
That was easy.
One thing they also will need is a lockdown closer, and a guy named Edwin Diaz is a free agent.
Oh, man.
So those are the two best fits for the Mets in free agency. But to play along, I'm guessing Caroline was not wanting me to just say, bring back Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso, though I'd like to say, bring back Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso. Outside of that, there's going to be a need here to do a lot of work in the bullpen. Let's play in a world that Edwin Diaz does return to the Mets, which, if you ask me today, I think is a likelihood that he will be back.
I agree.
Beyond that, in the bullpen, you have Brooks Raley on a cheap option. He'll be back. AJ Minter coming back from lat surgery. And then shrug. Drew Smith has a cheap option, and he might be competing for a spot. Huascar Brazoban. Everyone is free agents that was in this bullpen or injured in the case of Reed Garrett. They need to retool this bullpen. And I think it's important that they get another high leverage guy. maybe someone with some closing type experience. I'm looking at a Sir Anthony Dominguez. I'm looking at, even on a slightly bigger end, is Devin Williams willing to stay in New York and set up? Is Robert Suarez willing to consider setting up? This is a year, based on how 2025 went, where the bullpen just was not secure at all. I think it's very important that the Mets, at least for the top, let's call it 4 to 5 spots, it's reliable guys that you can count on. And I think that leads to going to the shopping at the top of the market. And then from there, I'll let David Stearns have his fun. I know it didn't work out so well this year, but historically he's had the ability to build bullpens with lesser names, and I don't want to stop that, but I definitely want to see them get some more reliability at the end of games.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, though, to go back to your original point, I think it, once again, and we've done this exact combo before, and it had the results we exactly expected. It makes sense for both sides for Edwin Diaz to be here. Like, who can you name in the pipeline that is going to be closing game? Do you expect the Mets to be a playoff team next year? All of us sitting here, the answer is yes. Well, if you're a playoff team, that means you should be leading a lot of games. And if you're leading a lot of games, you need somebody to slam the door on a lot of those games. And I think Edwin Diaz is very comfortable in this organization. And I think this one is simple as, hey, give him a raise, right? You kind of rip up what's left of the deal. You give him a raise. Both sides are back. I think, Joe, first base is a lot more interesting. And the combo around it is, once again, it probably makes sense for both sides, Pete Alonso and the Mets, to find common ground here. But that's easier said than done. And I do think with Diaz, Diaz is very, very good at his job. He comes in, he closes the door, he's phenomenal. Pete Alonso is an incredible offensive presence. But how many times can David Stearns use the word run prevention? They want to get better defensively. And I'm not saying you slam the door on re-signing Pete Alonso because you don't think he's a great first baseman. That's not the conversation. But I think there's going to be some kind of effort with the Mets that if they do bring back Pete, how do we balance DHing him, something I don't think he likes doing, and having a better glove at first base for maybe half the games, right? Because Pete plays every day, every single day. Yeah. So somebody else playing first base half of the games is a colossal difference defensively for this team. And if the Mets can't find that plan, which includes common ground with Pete and a defensive replacement at first base, I like Josh Naylor a lot, Joe. I do. And this is a combo that I bet 90% of our listeners just turn off the pod because they don't want to hear a life without Pete Alonso on the Mets. But our job isn't to just say, hey, we want this to happen and we won't entertain anything else. I think our goal of this podcast, or at least has been, to try to present every different scenario possible for the Mets, which is, hint, hint, the job of a president of baseball operations or a GM for a team. And the argument for Naylor, if you have to have one, is, one, he's younger, quite simply, a couple years younger, about 3.5 years younger. Two, he is way better defensively. He's basically a net neutral defensively. He's a zero in terms of like outs above average. Exactly a zero. He's got a better arm, which throwing for Pete became a real problem this year. Hopefully that's something he can correct in the offseason. But Pete being -9 and outs above average, that's a range problem with Pete. Pete is very good at scooping the baseball, but has very legitimate range issues. And that's something that you can't always see on the team, on the broadcast, because, you know, you might just be like, oh, that ball was hit hard and got by him, but other guys make the play on it. Naylor's a little bit of an upgrade there. I think Naylor is a better pure hitter at putting the ball in play, batting for average. I think he is a step down power-wise. Not even close, in my opinion. And it's a matter of that he'd be another left-handed bat where Pete's a right-handed bat, and how you want to balance your lineup. So that's an early name for me, Joe, because I don't think there's a lot of solutions at first base, to be honest with you.
There really isn't. And Naylor's a good name, and we'll talk about the Japanese market a little bit in a little bit on this show. And Munetaka Murakami is a name that we will talk about that I think could be a potential solution. I think you make valid points, and David Stearns' hyping of run prevention, while I agree with it, and there are spots where I think they certainly can improve, my worry is that they sacrifice too much offense in favor of run prevention. I just don't want the pendulum to swing too far the other way. Alonso, as you said, throwing is a problem. Range, it's not ideal. And of course, it's going to get worse as he ages. I think it really comes down to what the contract is. And I know on Baseball Night in New York, they did a segment, yay or nay, and they brought up contracts. I believe Spotrac made projections. I don't see this one happening, but if Pete Alonso is getting 6 years and $177 million from someone else,
then. I'll tell you right now.
he won't be a Met, and you have to figure out another way to spend your money. I would totally agree with letting him go at that price. I just can't see how it possibly gets to that level when last year there was legitimately zero interest in the guy outside of kind of Toronto. So there'll be more interest this year. I agree with that, but not to the point where he's going to get this massive, long-term, huge money deal. But it is important, as you said, we have to consider other options, because whether it's Pete Alonso gets a longer contract than we expect, or another thing we don't consider, what if he is done with New York?
Right, it's fair.
I'm not saying he is or he isn't, but he could be over it here. Maybe he did not like how last year's contract went, and he wants a new home. That's certainly possible. So we have to consider other options, but I thought it was just a fun way to start off the answer to the question. Two good fits, a power hitting first baseman and a closer who happen to just be Mets as free agents.
To be fair to your point of how you ended that, where Pete might just want to go somewhere else if all things are even. We just lived this with Jacob deGrom. I mean, we just did. Jacob deGrom didn't want to be here anymore. And not only was that easy because the Rangers made him a Godfather offer, but that made it even easier for the Mets, because the Mets then can let a legend go that there was some issues at the time. DeGrom ultimately did get hurt with the Rangers. There was a lot of injury issues with DeGrom with the Mets, and both sides just kind of moved on. And with Pete, there's not injury issues. He is the absolute Iron Man. But if Pete wants to be a first baseman for 160 games, and get a 5-year deal, I don't think that's something the Mets will be willing to do. And if he can go find that, great for Pete Alonso. And a lot of people listening to this will not be happy, but these are the conversations you got to entertain. All right, the next one from Mad Team Parents. Freddy Peralta seems to be the big name floating around. What do you both think it would take to get him, provided the Brewers make him available? So this is a great question, Joe, because we're going to get a million scenario questions, and at times those could feel, like dreamy, or just have some hyperbole. I think this is not. The Brewers are a team that, number one, they're always going to trade guys like these typically. They're not going to hand them the Godfather pitching contract offer for a guy that is, in his prime, but when pitchers get closer to 30, they're just not going to be that kind of team, we think. Now, do they do business with the Mets? That's something I can't answer, but would this be somebody the Mets would be interested in? You would think so. David Stearns knows a thing or two about Freddy Peralta. He's the exact kind of frontline starter they need. And Joe, I would assume this will cost at least 2 of the Mets' top prospects plus.
I mean, to take it away from just Freddy Peralta specifically, I think he's still inexpensive for Milwaukee. That doesn't mean that they're not going to get out ahead of it as they have done previously. But I think the trade market is going to be, perhaps even robust with some really good options. We've talked about Joe Ryan. I think he's going to be available, and that's another guy that will cost you a lot in terms of prospects. But he is inexpensive financially as of right now. Sandy Alcantara had a great second half for Miami, and it just looks like that first half was the guy's first year back from Tommy John. Took a little bit to get his feet back under him and get his legs, and he was a horse in the second half, going 7 innings multiple times, and the stuff really looked like it bounced back, and it was a lot better in the second half for Sandy Alcantara. And I am going to say it over and over until someone tells me I shouldn't. I'm calling the Tigers about Tarek Skubal. And do I think that's a likely move? Maybe not. But this is a guy that is a free agent 12 months from now. Danny
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. He's been around. The thing is, he's only been this frontline guy for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So like people forget like the early part of his career, he was successful, but it wasn't this. But Danny Abriano at SNY.TV wrote an article about trade candidates and mentioned Skubal as one of them. And there was some like weird quotes from Tigers ownership about an extension for Skubal, and Scott Boras is his agent. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. And, right now Detroit is trying to make a World Series run. So this is probably not on the forefront of their mind. But if they're not willing to extend Skubal, they can trade him this winter and get a massive return for him. And, that might run Jonah Tong and, maybe one of Jet Williams or Carson Benz.
I think definitely.
And a couple things beyond that. So it's a massive deal, but I would be very aggressive. The Mets right now have one of, if not the best farm systems in baseball. And this is the time to pounce. This is the time to make that statement trade. And if there is any chance you could get your hands on Skubal, I think David Stearns needs to be all over it like white on rice.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the deal. Peralta and Skubal both have 1 year left of team control. I would almost guarantee one of the two are either moved or extended. There's just no way. The Tigers, I think, would be more willing to go into the year with the final year of Skubal under contract control, because the Tigers think they can win a World Series, whether you believe that or not. And I'm not saying the Brewers don't believe that, because obviously the Brewers are pretty close as we record this podcast. But as an organization, we have seen how they operate long enough to know they are not afraid of resetting at a spot when they need to. So, or making the decision to actually spend the money and extend him. Now, Alcantara and Joe Ryan are interesting because I don't think they're as talented right now as either of those guys, but they both have.
I would say I think Alcantara is every bit as talented as Freddy Peralta. He just missed the year with Tommy John. But Skubal, no one's on Skubal's level.
No.
Other than
besides
Paul
Skeens
in baseball.
Yeah. Who in 2 years will be traded. So
right. Save the chips.
Yeah, you're right. Seriously. Alcantara had a horrible first half. That's the issue with him. But he did look good in the second half. He's highly competitive, as we know all too well as Mets fans. Him and Joe Ryan have 2 years left of team control. And I think that's a really big difference. I really do. Because if you trade for Peralta or Skubal, you have to extend them. If you trade for Ryan or Alcantara, you could sit there and go, let's see what they do for 2 years before I have to make up my mind. I'm Steve Cohen. I have more money than anybody in baseball. I have confidence that I can sign them after 2 years. 1 year feels a little tighter, as we've seen. The Yankees traded a lot for Juan Soto. He had an amazing year with the Yankees, and they fell into the trap of thinking like, he'll be back. He loves it here. We had a great year. And then he's gone. So, yeah, bottom line is you're going to hear Joe and I talk about those 4 names and more, but if those 4 names, a lot. And I think we play a game, Joe. What would you set the odds at David Stearns trading for one of those 4 names? Am I missing an obvious one? Should there be a 5th or 6th name?
I don't know of an obvious one, but there's going to be more that pop up that we're just not aware of yet. Like maybe I think I've read some about Mackenzie Gore. If that's something that interests you.
I just don't put him in the tier of those 4.
Me neither. But he's a young guy. He's got years of control, kind of thing. But I think the trade market is going to be flush with options. Like I said, there's going to be other guys. Maybe Mitch Keller gets floated again. That's obviously not the same
rotation.
tier. Yeah, but there's going to be guys.
So those 4, what do you think? What would you set the odds of David Stearns trading for one of those 4? Mine would be shockingly shorter than you think. I actually would set it at like plus 300.
Wow. I'd put it maybe a little less likely than that, just because he just hasn't done it yet, and I need
Alcantara's going to be traded. Yeah. I'm about 98% sure he'll be traded.
They were very willing to trade him at the deadline. They had a high price, and it just wasn't met. And I think they're just going to retry it here in the offseason, and more teams could get involved. And so I am confident he will move. When you talk about just acquiring one of those 4, I'll put it at, I don't know, plus 500, plus 550, something like that. I think it could happen, but you're really narrowing it to a small number of pitchers that he has to acquire. I do think that David Stearns will make an impactful trade this winter. I would think it would be for a pitcher, but I do think an impactful trade is coming this winter for the Mets.
Steve Miller with a different outlook on this. With the Tim Lincecum comparison, do you think the Mets should try to sell high on Tong right now and include him in a trade package for an impact player this offseason? I'll answer it like this, Joe. Actually, maybe not. I was going to say I think he's the most likely of the big three to go back in a deal. Nolan McLean's not getting traded. Like, there you go. He's not getting traded. Who do you think's more likely to be traded, Tong or Sproat, in the exact deal we just talked about?
I would say if you're talking about one of those higher end guys, I think those teams will insist on Tong over Sproat. I think the Mets would rather trade Sproat than Tong if given the choice.
Interesting.
But I'll tell you this,
man, Sproat was good, man. Like, it's just crazy to me.
He was impressive, and we have to be very careful because I remember the swirl of information when Jonah Tong was just lighting up AA, lighting up AAA, get him up. And he has a few inconsistent starts at the big league level. And now it's just like, maybe now is the time to trade him because he wasn't Nolan McLean. Sproat, as you said, was impressive. I think Tong probably possesses more value if you're trading to one of those teams that is thinking long-term, right? Brand Sproat is a much older pitcher than Jonah Tong is. So if you're let's use Minnesota as an example, you're probably more interested in Jonah Tong because realistically, you're not winning in 2026. You're looking for 2027 and beyond. I would say Tong would probably be a higher priority. I don't want to trade him personally. I think he's going to be a big time pitcher at the big league level. I know there are some inconsistencies and there's things that he needs to work on, but this is the kind of guy that works on those things and figures them out. So I would do my best to keep him out of any deal possible. But if you're talking about acquiring a genuine frontline guy, you got to give to get, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt me probably more so than almost anybody else that pays attention to the Mets. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. So I would not be trying to trade Jonah Tong. And I think when Steve mentioned the Tim Lincecum comparisons, I think he's making like an implication of he's going to get injured. And I would like to point out that essentially every pitcher is going to get injured. So
yeah, we're at that point.
That's kind of just the way it goes.
Yeah, ironically, the only guy that ever used to ring true after all the problems he had as a prospect was Zach Wheeler. And then Zach Wheeler was the MLB's Iron Man literally until this year. So it's just, if it comes for everyone. Dan B, Dad Boss 76 on Twitter, give me one urgent move Stearns make that is out of character for him. I think it goes back to the combo we had. I think they'll trade for and most likely extend a pitcher. They don't have to with the guys with 2 years left, but I think it's more likely than not.
Yeah, I think that would be something that's out of character, right? David Stearns has proven so far here with the Mets that he's willing to make, granted on smaller term, bigger deals with relief pitchers. And there's not many relief pitchers that get big terms, so I don't know what would be out of character. I mean, unless you just say him giving Edwin Diaz another 4 or 5 year deal is out of character for him, like maybe that is it. But I would say out of character would be trading a haul of prospects for a big time starting pitcher and then proceeding to give that starting pitcher that 5, 6, 7 year deal that we know that he generally doesn't prefer doing. That to me is, realistically the thing that I think he could do that would be stepping out of his comfort zone.
John M, Johnny Mags on Twitter, do you guys think with the increasing likelihood of a lockout after the 2026 season, the Mets will be quite a bit more aggressive to try to win before the lockout occurs? My guess is we get the hottest hot stove we've had in a while. This is an interesting one. I mean, I think the Mets are going to be aggressive this year, but I think it's more of a proponent of how things ended this year, that they are going to be more willing to shake things up in a way that they weren't after the team just made it to the NLCS. I don't know how much the lockout the lockout is a podcast of its own, whether there's going to be a salary cap, how pathetic a lot of these small market teams are in terms of the arguments, because yes, I think teams should spend more and there should be more competitive balance, but I also think it's the biggest cop out for these billionaire owners that don't spend any money on the Guardians, on the Pirates, don't care about competing at all. There's going to be a lot of nuanced conversations with the lockout that I won't get too far into, but I think the bottom line is, Joe, I just think the Mets are going to be aggressive no matter what. I don't think that's on top of mind right now.
There's two sides to this pending lockout thing. One, baseball is not going to cease to exist. So you don't have to operate as if 2026 is the last year that Major League Baseball is ever going to be played. The one thing that you do have to consider when building your roster is, what will the next collective bargaining agreement look like?
Which is ridiculous, though.
It is, but you have to at least, when you're approaching this, you have to at least consider, will there be a salary cap? I think the answer is no to that question, by the way. But
okay.
Will there be? You have to consider that. If there isn't a salary cap, I bet you the penalties for being over luxury tax thresholds is going to be bigger and bigger than it was before. And maybe more than just, 75% of a dollar or whatever.
Which
right?
is a soft cap.
Right. I think that is a distinct possibility. In fact, I would say that's probably the most likely thing that they get a common ground on, just harsher penalties. So that's the only way I think you really have to consider it. Otherwise, this is just about 2025 didn't go well. Let's fix it in 2026. I don't think they need to be looking at this like baseball's ending, or, man, we really can't have a high payroll heading into 2027 because we're going to get penalized too much for it. This is an organization that has proven, if nothing else, we could say anything we want about the Mets, and you could say what you want about David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza and anything. This is a team that's willing to spend money. So I don't think they're going to be afraid of penalties. They weren't afraid of draft pick penalties last offseason. So I don't think any of that's really going to play into it. This is just about, in 2026, how can we be better? And I think that's David Stearns' priority. And that's the way I think he has to operate, is just trying to win in 26, and you deal with 27, 28, and 29 when you get there.
Well, also to answer your question, John, which was a really good one, I think another factor is what we just said. The fact that 4 of the game's best pitchers are either have 1 year left of team control or 2 years left of team control in markets that don't spend at that rate also enhances the hot stove. That a couple of these guys will probably be moved. It's good timing in regards to that. All right, we're going to call this chunk of the show the Future at First Base 5-pack, because we have 5 questions that all kind of dance around the same topic. I'm going to read them all together, and then Joe and I will discuss, because I want to give as much shout outs on this show, and a lot of them are 5-star reviews and YouTubes, which we appreciate. B. Eric Y. 5-star review. Thank you. With Nimmo's flagging skill set in left field, is there a chance the Mets consider moving him to first if Alonso signs elsewhere? I wonder how his athleticism plays at first, and his bat may play well there compared to other first basemen in the league. Peter Cullen on YouTube. Can Nimmo be moved to first base, Juan Soto to left, and Alonso to DH? Would that work? Eli from Brooklyn, thank you for the 5-star review. Is it really crazy for Soto to be the full-time first baseman next year? Isn't there a chance he could be an average or even slightly below average first baseman? Michael Brooks, NYC. What are your thoughts on possibly moving Soto to first base and having Pete back as the DH? I was actually pleasantly surprised by what I saw of Ryan Clifford in right field this year. He's not going to be an all-world out there, but he could be a competent corner outfielder when ready. And then C, NYM Jets C. If they don't resign Pete, does moving Nimmo or Soto to first base and I can't believe how many people had this exact thought. I talk about this team with you every week, and I have never thought about this. So Nimmo or Soto to first, and clearing playing time for Benj and Williams in the outfield, or later AJ Ewing, makes sense. Seems a lot more like a Stearns build. First off, I like everybody's vast knowledge of the farm system. That I really do appreciate. And my last point I'll make is, while I don't think it's on the trajectory that everyone's suggesting here, I do think the Mets are going to make moves this offseason that clear space for Benj to play. I think that is absolutely a thing. I think the Mets want Carson Benj, if not with the Mets out of spring training, but very possible, a big part of the team at some point of next season. Joe, What do you think of the carousel of Juan Soto or Brandon Nimmo at first base?
Like you, I have given this approximately zero thought. I think I got one tweet like a couple weeks ago, someone asking about Soto to first base. I don't know if it was one of these individuals that sent in, but yeah, I think Juan Soto wants to be a right fielder.
Yeah,
and Juan Soto got $765 million. So if he wants to be a right fielder, he's going to be a right fielder. I don't
also,
think he. Yeah.
I never felt like Juan Soto was dreadful in right. Number one, he has the best arm out there. And yes, his pathway to the ball is not the best at times. But listen, I thought Nimmo was worse. Let me say that. I thought Nimmo was a worse outfielder than Juan Soto.
I think I don't agree with that. I think you're a little I know how you and Brandon Nimmo need to sit down.
I love Brandon Nimmo, but man, he's a tough watch in left field these days.
Juan Soto is not a good right fielder, Connor.
No, he's not. But Juan Soto also is one of the best hitters in baseball, so I don't really care most of the time.
For sure. But Juan Soto, right fielder, I think that's where he's comfortable, where he wants to be, and he works incredibly hard to be as good as he could be. It's what it is right now. Right field is going to be a spot, at least for the near future, that you have to deal with Juan Soto out there. I have no earthly idea how Brandon Nimmo would translate to first base. Your guess is frankly as good as mine. I think we need Ron Washington in here as third base coach and infield coach, because you could just replay the scene for Moneyball. It's like first base is easy, right? Tell him.
Oh my God.
It's not easy. So it's first base is it's not nearly as easy as we think. I appreciate the outside the box thinking that if Pete Alonso is to depart, because I don't think Pete is signing back to be a full-time DH. I don't think that's something he has any interest in. And if the Mets pitch that to him, I think he will not be amenable to that. It's unfortunate where they're at, and I think it's going to transition over time. But thinking just in 2026, I find it very hard to believe that either of the Mets corner outfielders are going to become their first baseman.
I don't see it either. I'm pretty confident Soto will be in right field. I'm less confident Nimmo will be in left. And the problem is Nimmo's contract makes that difficult. And you said this at the top of the show, and I think it's very important. We could sit here and be as critical as we want of any player, especially after a season like that. And we don't enjoy that. Trust me, it's my least favorite part of this podcast. I wish they all played great, and we were just talking about how awesome the Mets are. But you do need to be careful to not just press like the nuke button with no solution at some point. You can't, because I can't sit here and be like, hey, Pete Alonso might not be back. Okay, well, that's a lot of production out of the lineup.
We have Brandon Nimmo.
That's a lot. We have Brandon that's a lot of, even Brandon Nimmo out of left field, who I think had a worse year than the numbers indicate, but it's still numbers to replace. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Carson Bench is going to be an all-star. I hope Carson Bench is as awesome as he's been. He's flown through the system, and I think he's going to be pretty good. But yeah, you do need to have, like, if Nimmo plays first, okay, so then is Bench in left? Who's in center? And that does not replace Pete Alonso's offense at all. That's actually a terrible move in my eyes. So, yeah.
And then what happens if Brandon Nimmo just can't play first base?
Which I'm not really that confident in, to be honest with you.
I have no idea if he could or couldn't. Like, I think I know a good amount about baseball, and I do this podcast. I don't know everything that makes up a good first baseman, and if Brandon Nimmo really checks, how many of those boxes does he check?
Yeah. Yeah. So very interesting topic. That's why we took literally 5 questions on it. I'm not, crapping on the topic. It's just, you and I are more pessimistic on that solution than a lot of other people. And we're going to find out what the Mets plan is here, because that's why David Stearns is paid what he is, because I don't think this is as easy as it appears. You're listening to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SMY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Let's keep it rolling here. DMMP with a very interesting question. Do you think the Mets will be involved with the Japanese market this offseason? Murakami could be posted and could be a first baseman or third baseman, as could Tatsuya Imai, who is a very intriguing younger pitcher, Takahashi, Akamoto, and others. Stearns did go to Japan after all. So, Joe, I kind of want you to break down this question like you've never talked about these guys, because as much as we definitely talked a lot about Murakami, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this is their first time really digesting this year's Japanese market.
Do I think the Mets will be involved? Absolutely. David Stearns did not fly to Japan to be uninvolved in the market. Does
To go
that
on
mean?
vacation.
Yeah, I don't think David Stearns' top vacation destination was to go watch NPB baseball games. Like, I think there's other options for him, especially as you said, he makes plenty of money. He could go anywhere he wants. But as far as the market, do I think they'll land one of the two top guys, which would be Munetaka Murakami, as the listener said there? He's like a first base, third base. I consider him more of first base DH, but this is a left-handed thumper in a league over in NPB where there isn't power. He stands out amongst essentially everybody there. Hits the ball incredibly hard, hits the ball incredibly far. He missed a lot of time this year injured. I believe it was an oblique. Missed a whole bunch of time with that. Came back and just started mashing homers, including a walk-off home run in front of the physical eyes of David Stearns at the ballpark. So Murakami is a guy I look at as he could be an alternative at first base if you do not want or do not work out something with Pete Alonso. You can choose to go for Murakami instead, and you'll get that type of power production. You're going to be taking some risk on how he's going to transition defensively, and there is swing and miss in his game in Japan, and a lot of Japanese pitchers are not as good as American pitchers, so you have to take that into account. What will his strikeout rate be when he comes over to America? But he's lining up to be one of those guys that could get in the neighborhood of $200 million. He's only 25 years old, so that's your long-term big money type of move. And Imai, right-handed pitcher, he is listed at 5'11", 154. And obviously that is a not tall, slender pitcher. He looks a little bigger than that in watching video on him. So I'd love to know what his true weight is. He looks more like 170 or so to me, but this is some really, really special stuff. It's a fastball up into the upper 90s. He'll touch 99 miles an hour. He throws a hard gyro slider that Japanese hitters struggle to touch. He has a splitter, which is pretty common for Japanese pitchers, and he's got a Vulcan change, just like Jonah Tong. So they could bond over the Vulcan change if Imai ends up signing with the Mets. And he's 27 years old, posted an ERA below 2 this year in the NPB, strikeout rate over 10 guys per 9. I think this is a real possibility to get a 9-figure contract. And I don't know if Stearns saw him while he was over in Japan or not, but those are the two guys I think that you really want to keep an eye on in the Japanese market. And the Mets are certainly going to be heavily involved in at least talking to those guys.
Murakami is going to be interesting because it feels like he has all the power in the world. But at some point, you do need to ask yourself, as that price gets pretty crazy, is he not just an unproven version of Pete? And I don't mean that in such a simplified way, Joe, but all we hear about Murakami is he could hit the ball 500 feet. He's probably got upwards of 30 home run power. He's not fast. He's not good defensively. And he could have a lot of swing and miss when he gets here. Now he is 25, so that would be the counter argument. But I'm fascinated by that one. I'm excited by him because it's the new feeling, right? Like, what if he hits 40 home runs? And how cool would it be to have our own Japanese slugger? I love all those things. But it's interesting to me, like, exactly what Pete Alonso is. It just feels a little bit of like mystery box verse. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Here's $100 or a mystery box. Which one do you want?
This box might have $100 in it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah.
So I know it's not fun. I'm not adding any fun to this conversation, but that is how I feel. Hey, we're gonna see where that goes. It wouldn't shock me either. Like, that's gonna be the Yankees will be in that, of course. They need a first baseman. West Coast teams will be in that. The Japanese market will be really fun this winter. All right, we'll knock out these. We'll do these three in a little bit more rapid fire. But the New York Mets 1969 from YouTube. maybe this one's not rapid fire because we just haven't talked about him. Can you talk about the status of Christian Scott and what do you feel his contribution will be next year? I mean, Joe, besides innings, it feels like Christian Scott will be ready to roll for spring training. He's been out a long time, as we expect, right?
Yeah, he had Tommy John almost a year ago. It was in October of last year. He's throwing off a mound. He posted it on Instagram a couple weeks ago, and I shared it on Twitter. From everyone that I talked to, he's slated to be, if not full go for spring training, pretty close to full go for spring training. And something that we need to consider when we're building and looking ahead to this Mets pitching staff in 2026, there is no denying that the Mets need to acquire one of those guys we talked about in trade, or maybe they dip into free agency for a Michael King or somebody like that. But they need to add to the rotation. Just as important as adding a pitcher like that to the rotation, they need more pitchers because at its core, the reason Jonah Tong came up to the Mets this year was they ran out of starting pitchers. They had nobody else physically to turn to. So that's why he came up. And Christian Scott, to me, as you said, it's a forgotten guy. A year ago, Christian Scott was Nolan McLean. Christian Scott was Brandon Sproat. Christian Scott was Jonah Tong. And he gets Tommy John, so it's a bit out of sight, out of mind. I think he's going to prove out to be an incredibly valuable piece of depth heading into 2026. And as we say on the Mets pod over and over until our faces get blue, you can never have enough pitching. And I suspect Christian Scott will play. It'll ultimately end up being a meaningful role in 2026 because pitchers get hurt. A lot of things happen. And I'm just glad that right now things look good as far as his health and that he should be all systems go or close to that when we head down to Port St. Lucie in February.
This is the importance of having volume in your system, because if the Mets go out and trade for whoever you want to say, Freddy Peralta, and Brandon Sproat has to be in that deal, maybe you feel a little better about that because it's okay. We have Nolan McLean. Okay. Somewhere down the line, we have Jonah Tong, but we also have Christian Scott, where a couple of years ago when Joe and I were doing this podcast and ideas of these trades come up, you don't want to trade anybody because you don't have anybody if you traded one good pitching prospect. Now you have the volume where you hopefully have people that could fill those voids. Kafanikis on YouTube, what do the Mets do about the catcher position? Keep both Alvarez and Stearns, trade Albi and keep Stearns plus add a free agent. Joe, this is one of the simpler ones to me on this team, and maybe I'm just wrong, but I think this is one area I don't even think about this offseason. The Mets have a lot of problems or things that could be shaken up. Like there's a non-zero chance Brandon Nimmo isn't on this team next year. There's a non-zero chance Pete Alonso is not back. Jeff McNeil, Mark Viento. I can go down almost the entire roster besides Juan Soto. I don't think Francisco Alvarez is somebody I have any interest in moving on from.
I can rapid fire this one. You mentioned rapid fire. Nothing. You do nothing. You keep Francisco Alvarez as your starting catcher. Luis Stearns is, to me, one of the best backup catchers in all of baseball. And Alvarez was awesome when he came back from AAA. And, of course, he battled through the two fingers, basically playing with 8 fingers. And his offense took a huge step forward despite all of that. And defensively, I think he's still got work to do, but he's fine. I have no interest in changing up this catching duo. I think Alvarez and Torrens is exactly what you want to do.
B_D, please rank the following from highest odds to lowest odds of being traded: Nimmo, McNeil, Vientos, Acuna, Mauricio, Senga. Okay. I will say Vientos, highest odds. McNeil, second highest odds. Senga, third highest odds. I'll say Acuna after that. Nimmo and Mauricio. I think Mauricio is last because I think that he still has a ceiling and I don't think he has much value. So I think that's just the dumbest trade to make. If a guy has untapped potential and you can't get anything for him, just keep him in your system and see what happens. And maybe he improves. So, which, to be fair, we had this exact argument about Mark Vientos a couple years ago. And then when he did come up, he had an amazing season for the Mets. It hasn't worked out since then, But the one good season of Mark Vientos in 2024 is way better than giving him away for nothing, by the way. Like, that's a little important to note here. But yeah, Joe, I'll say it one more time much quicker. I think it's Vientos, McNeil. I don't expect either to be back with the Mets next year. Senga, I really don't expect Senga to be on the Mets next year. I think they'll trade him and pay down anything that they have to. And then Acuna, kind of 50-50. Nimmo, very difficult to figure that one out, but I don't see them trading Mauricio. So, Joe, how would you rank these?
Honestly, not too different from you, Connor. I have Vientos and McNeil 1 and 2. And then I flipped Acuna and Senga. And the reason I did that is Acuna is a player that's out of minor league options for 2026. And essentially, you're saying Acuna is my utility infielder, or you send him to a smaller market team that might be willing to give him some more at-bats, and you find a different utility infielder. Senga, you mentioned the possibility of, having the pay down contract. Despite the weirdness that's surrounded Senga over the last year plus, at 2 years and $30 million, you shouldn't have to pay down $1, and you should be able to get something of value back.
Right. That's why I think he'll be gone, though. I just think he's so easy to move, and I think it's over here.
I wouldn't be shocked if he's moved at all. I just wonder. I think it depends, too. Do you trade Brandon Sproat? Do you trade Jonah Tong? Do you trade any of these other younger pitchers, and how does that impact Senga? But I would lean. It's more likely than not that Senga is traded, but I just flipped him in Acuna. And then I went Mauricio and Nimmo last because I've mentioned this on the show the last couple of weeks. When it comes to Nimmo, he's a guy that signed this long-term deal and wanted the no trade clause because he wants to be a Met for his whole life. And it doesn't matter how anyone else feels about it other than him. So maybe that's something that the Mets do talk him into waiving to go somewhere else. But I'm going to operate as if Brandon Nimmo wants to be a Met and will be a Met. And Mauricio is a guy that will have a minor league option remaining. So the Mets can simply put him in AAA Syracuse and use him when they need him. And as you said, maybe he rebuilds value by going and crushing the ball in Syracuse.
So did you also have Mauricio last?
Next to last. So
next to last because of Nimmo.
Mine is Vientos, McNeil, Acuna, Senga, Mauricio, Nimmo. And Nimmo is, I would say, purely because of the no trade and contractual status that even if he was willing to waive it, how much of that do you have to eat? And at what point is it? And at what point is it not worth it to even do it? Like, how much money is it? Because Nimmo is still, this podcast over the last couple of weeks, I would say, has been maybe a little critical of Brandon Nimmo. He is still a good player. This is not like catastrophic. It's just
it's not Anthony Rondon.
No, exactly. We're just trying to think of ways. How can you shake up a team that is largely tied in contractually?
We'll close out with one down on the farm mailbag. This from Rob O'Brien, 766. What's the status of Calvin Ziegler, and is Matt Allan absolutely done?
All right, so I'll hit these here. Calvin Ziegler is throwing down in Port St. Lucie, coming off of Tommy John surgery. So they're hopeful spring training-ish for him. So he's throwing down there, and he's making some progress. Matt Allan, unfortunately, had another injury. I don't know exactly what it was. All I know is it was something in the arm. To my knowledge, he has not had any kind of surgery, isn't scheduled for any surgery, but something in his arm caused him to miss the second half. And something to note about him is that he actually becomes a minor league free agent this offseason. And the Mets will have a decision to make here. Is Matt Allan someone they want to continue working with, given all of the mass arm injuries that unfortunately he's gone through? And, we talked to him earlier this year on the Mets pod, one of the hardest working guys, seriously motivating. You just wonder, will just his arm simply not allow him to do it?
Yeah, it's a shame with what Matt Allan's had to endure, especially after it felt like he was back this year. By the way, it's good to close the show by with something that we started with, Joe. I said if the Mets don't re-sign Edwin Diaz, I have no idea who the heck is closing games for this team. And
Calvin Ziegler?
This is not the answer to the question. But if you want one guy in the system that could project many years from now with closing stuff, it is Calvin Ziegler to me. I think his
Ziegler,
days of trying to be a starting pitcher are probably over.
I would be looking into making him a reliever for sure, right? Whenever he comes back. But you want a couple others? Ryan Lambert, I think, has that kind of personality and stuff, and he dominated Double-A this year up to 100 miles an hour.
He's much further ahead than Ziegler.
Yeah, much further. He's going to start in Triple-A, and I don't know about closer, but Dylan Ross, who the Mets called up for the last couple of days of the season, he didn't pitch at all. That splitter that he has is unbelievable, and he happens to throw near 100 too. So,
well, I'm glad the Mets pitched Ryan Stanek with their season on the line instead of seeing that. That's nice.
Should have just called up Dylan Ross earlier in the month, but I think we have some time to have the Dylan Ross discussion, Connor, as we finish here recording October 7th. This is just the, I guess, first, because last week was really the end of 2025. This is the first.
This is the beginning.
2026. This is the beginning of the offseason, and there is a list of about 100 relievers in free agency that I need to look into each and every one of them, so I'm prepared for the show. I brought up some bigger names earlier, Devin Williams, etc., but I'm going to find who those guys are that I think David Stearns should look at for even the bottom part of the bullpen, and I think that is what makes this show fun.
It would be funny if the Mets turn Clay Holmes and do a solid starter, and then Devin Williams back and do an elite setup, man. I mean, it's just something very, very funny about that, but we'll see. All right, this is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac, performance range style, 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac, the all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade, IQ, Vistic, Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review of the question like you heard today. We'll look for it for a future mailbag. Very mailbag heavy on this show throughout the offseason. It's the best way for us to kind of communicate with you guys, and we love what you bring to the show. Of course, you can watch this show on SMY's YouTube channel. Subscribe over there. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.